This is Good Day Street Talk.
Welcome back. Joining me now is Sheena Wright, President and CEO of the Abyssinian Development Corporation, and Dr. Danielle Moss-Lee, President and CEO of the Harlem Educational Activities Fund, or HEAF. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Lee, we're talking about education today, and what do you think is fundamentally broken? We often hear about teachers, but others say parents need to take on more responsibility as well.
I mean, I think that the blame game that kind of frames the issue is probably where the problem begins. I don't think that there's anything that's fundamentally broken. I think that there are conversations that need to be had that aren't being had. I think that teachers don't have the resources they need in terms of non-instructional concerns of their children to really be responsive in the ways that our society now demands. And I think that a lot of working parents are held to a middle-class suburban standard for what it means to be an involved parent.
And Sheena, you work directly with schools and the students. Tell me exactly what your organization does. How is it that you're allowed to go into a school, make an assessment, and make changes?
Well, we are a comprehensive community development corporation, so focused on what makes the neighborhood work. And so we do everything from affordable housing, commercial development, social services, but we really appreciated early on that if our schools are broken, our neighborhoods will fail. So about almost 20 years ago, we've decided the community has basically taken over traditional public schools in its neighborhood. We were in a collaboration with the Department of Education and New Visions for Public Schools. We created several educational institutions. And so we are focused on making sure that we have successful, strong schools in our neighborhood.
What are some of the changes that you've made? What are some of the areas that you thought needed changing?
Well, I think that every adult in the system is accountable for the failure of our school system. Our school system is failing and it is very challenged. And so as a community development corporation, we decided that everyone has to come to the table, take the responsibility, and be a part of developing the solution. As Danielle said, the blame game gets us absolutely nowhere. So some of the things that we're very, very focused on is effective leaders and teachers in school, making sure that you have good people in place and that they have the level of support. Academic rigor. I mean, the curriculum and what you are presenting to the young people and how you do it is extremely important. You have to be focused on that. Parent and community engagement. If the community and parents are not involved, it's going to be very, very difficult in order to achieve the level of success. I think everybody knows it. It's not rocket science, but how do you get all the pieces working together is the challenge.
And Dr. Lee, you mentioned there are conversations that are not necessarily being had, difficult conversations or questions. What are some of those?
One of the things that we've really done to kind of turn around performance for our students is to engage young people in the conversation about what education needs to be. I like to say that education is not something we're going to do to them. They're not going to achieve if we're not partnering with them. So our young people have input into the curriculum. A lot of the non-traditional coursework we provide are, based on classes that they have actually asked us to offer, like ethics, like law and psychology, like forensic science. There is a wealth of information that young people are hungry for, but we've used accountability as an excuse to knock the creativity and the rigor, quite frankly, out of the curriculum. Just because you're doing test prep and doing well on tests doesn't mean the kids are learning something. And I think that we have to get some clarity around that. Our kids definitely have the opportunity to rate their teachers, to give staff report cards at my organization, and they come alive in a way that they're not seeing in their regular schools, just because that level of input would never happen. But you can't make someone learn something. You have to engage them in a dialogue and partnership to get them to where you want them to go.
And Sheena, I can imagine there are students everywhere who think it doesn't matter, no matter how well I do in school. They don't necessarily see school as a stepping stone to a better life. How do you convince those students that this is the first step, and how do you get them to be engaged?
I think seeing is believing. I think if young people can see themselves in others, so mentorship is very important. Making sure that, as Danielle said, things are relevant to their lives, that they are out doing internships and seeing themselves outside of school, I think is critically important. But I do think that most kids absolutely appreciate the importance of education. They do want to do well. They do have hopes and dreams and goals. And I think we have to definitely, catalyze that energy in an appropriate direction to help them get to where we know they want to be.
You talked about the blame game, but if it isn't necessarily teachers or parents or the students themselves, what's changed? Because we've seen such a difference, even just with the last generation, in terms of how our schools are viewed and the kinds of results they're putting out in terms of graduation rates.
I mean, I think that a lot has changed externally that's impacted schools. Sheena's organization, through their housing and other initiatives, is doing some things to address those. But we've seen an increase in the wealth gap in this country. So we're trying to sell young people the idea that an education will provide you with a better life, and yet and still we see the middle class slowly disappearing from our society. And I think that some of the attack on the unions, which have really helped to create the middle class in America, in many instances, with coupled with affordable housing, particularly in New York City, is kind of not the best endorsement for what education can mean in your life in practical terms.
Now, we don't have that much time left, and this is a big issue, but I'm going to ask you both quickly about charter schools, particularly in Harlem. We've seen some schools that are very successful in terms of charter schools. Where do you stand on that?
I think that anything that brings innovation and pushes the envelope is certainly welcome, but I think we all need to be very clear that charter schools are not going to save us. In Harlem today, only about 20% of the schools in Harlem are charter schools. Now, we've got to focus on that other 80%. We have to have a strategy that focuses on traditional public schools, gives them the resources that they need in order to be successful, or we're just going to fail wholesale the community.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I think that charters are one solution. They're not the only solution. They're not the cure for what ails us in terms of education. We know that most charter schools don't outperform, local traditional public schools. So we can't be throwing all of our eggs into that basket, but we certainly should be, encouraging innovation where it emerges.
All right, and in terms of changes in creativity, you talked about different classes that students really want that seem to kind of reflect real life, law, psychology. How difficult is it to put those creative things in when all we're hearing about is art programs are being cut, music is being cut, and we're kind of getting more into a rigid sense of what should be taught at school because there isn't money, and frankly, our students are proving that their reading and writing is not so great, so we need to focus on that. How do you get that to happen?
I mean, I think that there needs to be definitely a lot of advocacy around these issues. Time and time again, there are studies that say that the arts, contribute to math and science achievement, and yet and still, they still tend to be the first things that are cut. I think that if you went to your average Upper East Side private school and told those parents there would be no more arts programming, visual, music or anything else, it wouldn't be acceptable. So I think, there's a tendency to create poor solutions for poor kids and, to make rich solutions available to rich kids.
How do you get parents to make a difference? How do you advise them to lobby the Department of Education, the principal? What do you suggest?
We are very, very involved in advocacy and organizing. We're a member of the Coalition for Educational Justice, which is a parent organizing group, and they are very active and engaged. They care, they appreciate what the challenges are, and they're really very, very focused on what the issues are.
So if you're a parent, you should look for a group like that to join for your school. Power in numbers.
That's right.
Well, ladies, I would like to thank you both so much for joining us. This is information we can certainly use. So again, thanks to my guests, Sheena Wright of the Abyssinian Development Corporation and Dr. Danielle Moss-Lee of the Harlem Educational Activities Fund.